Okay, for our next lecture, we will be looking at a great paper by Hubert Dreyfus on the internet, inspired by Soren Kierkegaard's take on the press during his day in like 1840s or so. This is a bit of an older paper, so the internet hadn't fully matured into the internet that we know of today, but many of the same concerns from like 15 years ago still apply to the internet today. So I really like this paper. I think Dreyfus has a nice account, and it's cool to see an old take about the way old news and old conversations are being had, applying to today's internet age. So who was Kierkegaard? Well, he was a Danish guy. He never left Copenhagen for his entire life. He's a Christian theologian, poet, philosopher, novelist, author. He is all sorts of things. And he's also grandfather to existentialism. So if you're familiar with the existentialists, many of them, if not all of them, were inspired by Kierkegaard's work. Interestingly, Kierkegaard didn't publish under his own name. He published under pseudonyms, and each pseudonym purportedly was supposed to be a different kind of character who occupied a different sort of phase of life, which we'll look at the phases of life as Kierkegaard thought of them. So Kierkegaard's critique of his present age in 1846 is that his age was characterized by what he called disinterested reflection and curiosity that levels all qualitative distinctions. So what this means is that people were talking about politics and life and society, but in a almost purely conceptual way, where they weren't actually committed to the society, to the ethics, to the politics, and they were just interested in the ideas for themselves. Kierkegaard thought this was a problem. The disinterestedness with which the ideas flew about meant that people weren't attached to them in the way that they should be attached to ideas that direct the motions of life and society. And the result of not being attached to these kinds of ideas is a kind of nihilism or alienation from one's society. So the two big agents of this leveling of all ideas, like all things seeming equal sort of thought, is the public, which is what he called a monstrous abstraction. So public opinion doesn't represent any one person's opinion, but rather the generalized opinion of a lot of people sort of grouped together. But in not representing any specific opinion doesn't, says Kierkegaard, represent any particular opinion at all. And then there's also the press, which is the real villain. So the press enables the public by allowing anyone to set errors into circulation with no thought of responsibility. Dang, this really sounds like Twitter and Facebook and social media to me. Everybody has a platform and can say anything at all that they want to say. You can open up Reddit today and start a thread that says just about anything. And it doesn't require backing up with real evidence. We can make up evidence. We can generate AI text and AI videos, right? That there is this sort of general practice of the press which is unrestricted in this way. And like free speech is good. However, Kierkegaard saw the disinterested use of speech in this particular way as problematic, that it would be better if our free speech was directed towards the practices, ideas, and social forms of engagement that we're actually committed to and that actually we care about. So this system of the press representing the public created a system of having a bunch of detached spectators who were only interested in idle talk and voyeurism rather than activism and committed care for the ideas. The press becomes a voyeuristic form of amusement that focuses on scandal and gossip and enjoys undermining outstanding individuals for the sake of gossip. And likewise, it's characterized by a paralysis of action. So since the public sphere lies outside of power, it opens up the possibility of endless reflection. So the public is not a governmental body. It's not an ethical agency. It's just a general concept. And so there's endless reflection that's possible within the public sphere that makes no actual change, like going forward in the sort of general progress of humanity. So Kierkegaard says at any moment reflection is capable of explaining everything quite differently and allowing one some way of escape. And the core problem here is the anonymity that the public has in the press, and the lack of commitment that ideas have to making change that is effective in the world. So Dreyfus argues that the internet is very much like what Kierkegaard called the press, except it's like on steroids and knocked all the way up to 11. So Dreyfus argues that the internet is like a high-tech synthesis of the worst features of the press and the coffeehouse culture, of disinterested, voyeuristic, anonymous conversation about ideas that are uncommitted to the world. And the result is that the internet acts as kind of like an ultimate environment for promoting risk-free, anonymous, and idle curiosity. So let's see what Kierkegaard says about the development of like a life that this Kierkegaard thought there were like sort of thresholds for development for living a better and more complete life. The first of which is the aesthetic stage of existence, which is sort of something like a hedonic state where you're kind of interested in sensuous experience, you valorize possibility over actuality, there's a bit of egotism, a fragmentation of the subjective experience. So a person living the aesthetic life might have all sorts of different identities given the communities that they take part in, and they just put on a different mask because all that matters is that they fit in, not that they act as who they are. The problem with this aesthetic life is that it tends to lead to a kind of nihilism and a sort of skepticism about the world, because, again, the person who lives in the aesthetic stage is interested in the sensuous, and the sensuous is fleeting. So likewise, life is fleeting. But in recognizing the fleetingness of sensuous experience in life, the aesthetic person arises and grows into the next stage, which is the ethical stage of life, which is to understand rules and what connects us all, what makes humans the same, and how we might follow those rules to live better lives. So the ethical stage of life is characterized by recognizing the universal in humankind and understanding social norms, and likewise how duty guides and justifies actions which are aimed at benefiting the community over the individual. Now, the issue with the ethical stage of life is that it's rigid and structured in a way that doesn't suit the individual always. So this ends up leading to like famous contradictions. So, for example, we might think of Javert in Les Miserables, who is confronted with Jean Valjean's goodness, but also his life dedicated to justice. And these two things come into conflict, and rather than taking a leap of faith, which is what Kierkegaard says begins the religious stage of life, he jumps into the river. And what Kierkegaard wants us to do is, in recognizing sort of the difficulties of the empowered individual against the good of the community and the universal, is to take a leap of faith. So for Kierkegaard, Christian faith isn't a matter of towing the line of church dogma. Rather, it's a matter of individual subjective passion, which can be secularized. So Kierkegaard's conception of faith need not be in God, though for Kierkegaard it was. It could also just be faith in the thing that you are passionate about and committed to, despite maybe not knowing that it is doing good back unto you. So we can take these three stages of life, and Dreyfus analogizes them to ways of interacting with the internet. So the first way of interacting with the internet is in this aesthetic way, which is like the net surfer. So the characteristics of someone on the internet who just surfs is to have a life of endless possibilities. There are endless subreddits to get interested in. There's an avoidance of fixed identity, loss, or humiliation. If you get too many downvotes, you just create a new account. You live in the categories of interesting versus boring, and there's a commitment to curiosity as an end in itself, rather than to using the information that you learn and develop on the internet to make the world a better place. So just collecting ideas rather than using the ideas that you collect. Likewise, there's a sort of breakdown. Every aesthetic view of life is despair, and everyone who lives aesthetically is in despair, whether he knows it or not, says Kierkegaard. But if one does know it, a higher form of existence is an inescapable requirement. So eventually, says Dreyfus, just as Kierkegaard says about the development from the aesthetic to the ethical stage of life. The internet surfer begins to want to categorize and make sense of their life. They seek a higher form of internet existence, which leads them to an ethical stage. So an ethical kind of engagement with the internet is a life of stable identity and concrete involved action. So you might think signing online petitions for particular political actions, or using Facebook pages to organize people to get out and protest or something, right? It's about making choices that involve responsibility and commitment. And there's a firmness, a constancy, and steadiness to this kind of activity. But there's likewise a similar problem with ethical engagement on the internet as there is with aesthetic engagement, which is that it doesn't actually require commitment. That you sign the online petition, which has a sort of ethical dimension, but it's an online petition. What does it actually do to affect change in the world? Or you make a group that is like a politically oriented internet group, but what does that actually have to do with your political life and like your economic mobility in the actual world? You're just having conversations. It's this idle, disinterested talk. So what Dreyfus says is that the internet doesn't reject ethical life, it corrupts it. And it corrupts it by making and unmaking commitments too easy. So the ethical self is confronted with the despair of possibility, just as we're confronted with the same despair of possibility on the internet. The easy abstract ability to constantly reevaluate, dissolve, or switch commitments before facing real-world consequences is exactly the stage of internet engagement that challenges an ethical form of life. So again, Kierkegaard says that we need to leap cheerfully and decisively into the things that we want to be committed to and passionate about, and the internet makes this challenging. The internet allows us to wear many different kinds of masks, to get engaged in all sorts of different kinds of activities, and to never necessarily be committed to any of those activities. What the real challenge is of using the internet as an appropriate and powerful sort of tool for a good lived life is to translate the lessons and information and commitments that we make on the internet into our real world, so that we are no longer anonymously engaged with each other, but engaged with each other in a committed and important sort of way. So here Dreyfus, vis-a-vis Kierkegaard, argues that the internet encourages a fluid, emergent, and decentralized identity, which leads to nihilistic despair, to doom scrolling, right? And the takeaway is that there's a danger of detachment with our approach to and use of the internet, where the internet perfects what Kierkegaard called the public sphere by making it easier than ever to live as a detached, anonymous spectator, having opinions without consequences. And what's important for living a good life is that risk is required. We need to be committed to each other, and our identities, who we are, needs to not be anonymous, but actually present in the world and in the shared world of people. So true commitment, wisdom, and the stable self are only acquired by accepting the risk and potential pain of real world failure and action, which is not possible on the internet. And likewise, there's a sense of a simulated life. The greatest danger is becoming stuck in a simulated life full of doom scrolling, where endless possibility and easy commitment prevent the decisive, unconditional leap into love and care for one another.